So hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining. Today we have a great presentation on composable systems in Expanse by Ilkay Altentas, who is the Chief Data Science Officer at SDSC. But before we get started, I would like to bring your attention to the Exceed Code of Conduct. Everyone is usually well behaved, but if you observe any kind of behavior that you think is inappropriate, please let us know by submitting a report at exceed.org/code of conduct. And it's also important to be aware that Exceed is committed to providing training events that foster inclusion and show respect for everyone. If you do see terminology that you think is inappropriate or offensive, please let us know by sending an email to terminology@exceed.org. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand it off to Ilkay. Take it away, Ilkay.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar and new faces here today. I will watch my chat as I speak, and I can definitely answer questions as they come up. But I think in the end, we might have another question and answer session. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, definitely. But we'll do our best to man the chat as well. I see John Graham is with us and Mary Thomas, and there may be a few others who feel comfortable helping out with that.
Great. And let me bring my chat over here too, so I can try to monitor it at the same time. Are you able to see the full slide?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Wonderful. So hello again. I'm Ilkay Altentas. I'm at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, and I'm a co-PI of Expanse, mainly responsible from the composable systems functionality. And today we are going to talk about what we mean by composable systems, why do we need them, and the functionality we built and we are extending in Expanse in this area. And I'll talk about a few of the current applications and end with a short discussion of how you could use Expanse composable systems functionality. So I think composable systems begs the question of what are we composing, right? And we are composing everything, I think, in the advanced computing ecosystem conceptually when we say composable systems. So this includes big data systems and software and computational science software and tools that we are scaling normally in our computational infrastructure, data science pieces, and there's the advanced cyber infrastructure from storage to networking to computing capabilities. But mainly it's about their applications. That's why composable systems runs and will run a little differently than the rest of the turnkey functionality in Expanse. And it's mainly also about the individual problems and their needs. And we built a functionality in Expanse to appropriate some of the machinery, so to say, to this capability that we could then use it towards solving unique problems with the specific needs for heterogeneous computing, storage, and systems functionality. I think there's a huge motivator for it, right? Big data and convergence of that with scalable computing at all scales can be very valuable. It enables what we call data-driven applications, and these applications come in all kinds of domains. More and more, we are seeing smart and personalized and those type of things added to the name of these application domains or age-old disciplines like medicine and how we manage our cities at the societal scale, or energy, manufacturing. In the industry, there's sort of a lot of data-driven marketing. So these are all data-driven applications, and some of them are more dynamically natured than others. Regardless, they need to bring together data with computing. And when we think about data, a lot of interactivity happens there, a lot of exploration with data happens there. And it's characteristically different than having a big simulation and parameterizing it, or staging files for it and running that simulation. That's really a scalability and capacity activity, of course, around some scientific thinking and logic. In data-driven applications, I think there's a lot of interactivity, especially in the beginning of it. There's a lot of exploration, and scaling that exploration in ways that the data can be valuable as fast as possible becomes a part of the activity. So there is this influence of data coming from different environments, from facilities, from people, from sensors, from other simulations, and things like that. And there's a team thinking generally around it on how we could couple such data within the scientific workflow or within an application that impacts society or business or education. And that scalable activity comes up with open outcomes that we call, if it's a scientific discovery or in an impactful way in other domains. And that needs to be repeatable and reproducible. This becomes the general team science flow, so to say. And when we look at this, data systems, advanced computing, and connectivity is everywhere. I always say my smartphone is smart because it can actually sense the environment or the data. It can actually collect data and it can communicate that data. And when we think about smart applications, it's similar. But we have not just storage, but storage and knowledge management coupled together to turn storage into knowledge that we can drive simulations through. When we talk about computing, it's not just HPC or cloud or edge, but how we are actually using the full continuum in service of applications. And in terms of networks, now we are talking about software-driven or more programmable networks and high-speed connectivity that can actually couple big data sources to processors of that data in a very native, portable fashion. So it's really going beyond even the cloud concept, right? It's the heterogeneous data backend, heterogeneous computing environment, and coming up these namespaces together as a global scale computing ecosystem. And at the national level, I think we are seeing many examples of specialized resources for AI, for cloud computing, for edge capabilities, along with the high capacity, high-end computing platforms like Expanse and others in the Exceed supercomputing platforms. So what do we do with these? What are the opportunities, right? We should be able to use all of them together and compose applications across these platforms, first of all. But what do these applications do? A lot of them are about closing the loop between observation, experimentation, and simulation. Even within the simulation, if we can integrate AI or use streaming data, I think there are many advances to be made, and we can collectively improve the way we are doing supercomputing applications if we can integrate some of that smart functionality into it in an in-situ fashion or in a composable fashion. And a lot of it is about real-time data reduction, curation, annotation from facilities, from other data sources. And there's some reactiveness in these systems, like there's some self-control. Think of an autonomous car or an autonomous environment that computing supports. And there's definitely multiple brains. There is no centralized brain when we think of understanding what data is telling us. And coupling edge, cloud, HPC in these in ways that fit in the context of that intelligence becomes very important. And for that to happen, I think we need new software tools, new AI-driven computing platforms and middleware, and increased security, integrity, privacy practices that come with working with data. So it's not just one size fits it all, although there are patterns. And the biggest pattern in there is getting value from data as fast as possible using the full continuum. how do we do this? How do we actually build environments that can help us not just do the computing, but also manage data, its size, its complexity, its quality, its speed in a dynamically adjustable fashion so that we can use data within applications. And again, methodologies, standards, tools, resources, these are developing in different domains, and they are required for us to have convergent applications in dynamically composable ways. So think of, any imaging, bioimaging, for instance. You can have massive raw image data coming from microscopy facilities, and there are very few people who can use HPC and big data together to generate value from that. And that value comes in the name of scientific knowledge, right? You can have smaller, but once we can do that, we can annotate imagery, we can create metrics and quantify imagery. We can actually annotate smaller versions of the same image in, lower resolution forms or other types of thumbnail forms, so that we can actually view these images for education and other purposes from different platforms, rather than these large-scale, detailed visual interfaces. And where does AI live? It lives right here. So there is actually a training and inference loop that needs to happen, and the computing infrastructure needs to support it if any application is going to happen at the amplifying the value of big data zone, that gray zone that I'm talking about. So the activity in that sense happens. We get some value or knowledge out of data related to a domain, and we use it to benefit an application using scalable computing within heterogeneous workflows. That's what are those workflows are, what problems those workflows solving. And to be able to do that, we also need to look at what is involved. It's not just, again, the computing platforms, but it's the whole ecosystem around it that enables data management, data analytics, computational science, in a way that could be all brought together. But the minimum component of that is being able to compose our systems in a way that supports that loop or this continuum problem solving. So there are some patterns, as I said. A typical pattern on this could be having an observed data collection, and based on what we learn from data, which is big data processing or more AI-like functionality, derive a simulation from it. So when you look at the two sides of this pattern, one side is more machine learning and big data and edge computing or processing capability oriented. We see a lot of like GPU, TPU, or different processing units, FPGAs, big data platforms, edge platforms, and things that couple the edge to middle auto-scalable inference scenarios. Like the one I'm going to talk about is the PRP Chase TI combination, the Nautilus platform. And when you look at the simulation ensemble part, it's about still the capacity and being able to coordinate that high capacity HPC task together with and in a way that's coupled to the AI capability. And when I say AI, I really mean big data, edge, machine learning, and these specialized processing capabilities, data capabilities that's required to achieve that. So, but it's very dynamic, right? When you have an observed data collection, there could be some variety to it. There could be maybe noise. Suddenly you have an increased activity in a more interesting way that you need to scale and dynamically then parameterize a simulation. So it's not as expected at times, or it's not very standard, and we know exactly when we need the computing. So there needs to be some dynamic capability there, and we should be able to compose things based on that dynamic need. And often there are different parts to the solution and multiple people work on it. So systems also should enable the group work. How a group building really specialized FPGA codes interact with a group doing a specialized simulation code running on a high capacity environment. And can we then build platforms that supports those groups to work together and enables them to compose or federate what they do together in one seamless workflow? And that type of teamwork, I think, is also important when we can bring some enhancement to that activity and take care of, for instance, what's in the middle. Is that a data storage? Is that a data system that needs to happen? Do we need to collect information about what people are doing? So this paradigm, so to say, shifts can be extended to a new family of tools to enable these very specific applications with, at times, unique needs, but very much needed solutions. So what are some new requirements from the systems to enable that? Definitely interoperability at the system level, at the microservice level that we are running on these systems are needed. So these are sort of integration and delivery of capabilities that might come in form of, for instance, microservices that can run or port across platforms, but also it could be hosting of data-intensive workloads in a composed application in an auto-scalable way that can be deployed when need happens. So that's the dynamic scalability part. There's also a need for the on-demand interactive access. So I said users, if they can interact with the systems through high-level programming interfaces in the middle of their workflow even. When a simulation is happening, can we have a part of that, part of the outputs even be analyzed through an interactive, in an interactive fashion, so that we could take some human-in-the-loop decisions that affect steering of the downstream workflow or downstream steps in the simulation workflow itself becomes a part of the need. And to be able to do any of these, we need to understand performance better. So we need to be able to actually measure performance across these systems and integrate them in ways that we can provision across these systems if we are going to put them together as composable resources. The slides and the video will be available, by the way. I've seen a question on that, so definitely it will be made available. And if we take it out of the systems mode and again, bring it up to that, how does it reflect the science perspective? We need to enable best practices and we need to develop those patterns at the systems level to enable those best practices. So enable data-drivenness, scalability, dynamic behavior, and in a way that captures that workflow in a process-driven fashion. So we know exactly how these things come together and execute together. And we need to build it once we go across these systems, things to be accountable, and reproducible. So we need to be able to validate what happened. And, we need to enable this heterogeneity at the service level and systems level and the need for interactivity. And I think a part of it is also for us to build a collaborative working culture that brings these disciplines together and the systems to enable that. So these were the motivators for us to come up with that composable systems functionality in Expanse. And we are still scratching the surface and looking for applications, as you'll see. So when you think of it, how does it reflect on an overarching science scenario, all these ecosystem requirements? Expanse is here at the system level. And for any microservice or service to run on Expanse, there needs to be some form of resource management. And for that to be composable, it needs to be, in our case, in the Kubernetes ecosystem through container orchestration. And applications then, think of even Jupyter Notebooks bringing multiple microservices together, can be built to run across these systems through the capabilities that are being offered. And this all relates to data. There needs to be some data lifecycle management and data management, at least at the storage level. These systems also should be composable, federatable, and usable. So these are the type of things we look at when we are evaluating a composable application. And I'll come to that also in just a sec after I go through how we do composable systems in Expanse. And once we achieve such a heterogeneous workflow, the idea is it could be coupled at the user interface level for use by different audiences. And once you open something for use by different audiences, I think the scale, auto-scaling of that, and the on-demand nature of that or interactive nature of that will be a lot more apparent, right? Because multiple people based on need can come on one time versus, maybe the less load. Let's say I'll talk about the fire application. During a fire, there are definitely more load in the system, but on other times, you can definitely give up resources and make sure that other applications can use it. So I'm guessing this is not the first time you hear about Expanse, but Expanse definitely, in addition to this highly scalable compute units and heterogeneity in the nodes themselves, it came up with some innovative operations. Right, composable systems is what we are talking about today. There are definitely some special capabilities that offer better support for high throughput computing and science gateways. Interactivity through Jupyter environments is also a part of it. And another is cloud bursting through Slurm to cloud platforms is also a part of the platform here. So today I'm going to talk about the composable systems. And the composable systems functionality in Expanse is achieved through reserving and auto-scaling some of the cluster to be using Kubernetes instead of Slurm. Kubernetes is the interface to manage those nodes. And through CM scale and bright computing, we are going to ensure this environment is auto-scalable and it actually expands and shrinks based on the need that we are going to be bringing here. So the first example of it has been to couple this Expanse composable cluster, Kubernetes cluster, that we named Enthalpy, together with Nautilus. And here, through Admiralty, as a toolkit for federation, we were able to create a composed cluster or federated cluster out of these two Kubernetes-based environments to run applications across these. And you see also here the interactivity is achieved through Jupyter Lab or Jupyter Notebooks through a hub across these. And the data backend is supported through Ceph that gets shared between these two environments. So we focused so far on federation of the compute nodes, and some of these compute nodes, the Nautilus one, was built through yet another NSF support for the Pacific Research Platform, which is a network that connects the UC campuses and some others through a 10 to 100 gigabit disk-to-disk connectivity. And on top of the Pacific Research Platform, we were able to build Nautilus by adding GPUs on these platforms. And these GPUs are flash-based I/O nodes that are made out of regular gaming GPUs that are precision enough for some of the machine learning functionality, but not as Expanse or high precision as the ones under Expanse. But there has been a significant number of GPUs that is collected in this platform to date. And through Ceph, storage was also coupled to it, and petabyte plus storage in a cloud compatible way is also available. So it makes a really powerful combination when you think of being able to train and build models through Expanse and being able to do auto-scalable inference on, for instance, Nautilus. And that was one of the first things we tried. Another platform that shows some edge capability is the Sage pilot for building cyber infrastructure for AI at the edge. Sage platform or network is building edge accelerators to be deployed on networks like NSF network, like Neon. HPRN is the one that I'm gonna more talk about today. Area of things and other platforms that we can not just put sensors with accelerators on the edge, but we can also train models in other platforms like cloud-based platforms and deploy the models and schedule deployment of these models on those edge accelerators. So another powerful concept when we think about special capabilities and doing some of the computing on an edge platform due to reasons like latency or detail or privacy. There could be different reasons for that to happen. And being able to actually detect something at the edge and make it a part of a workflow so that can trigger downstream applications in a highly capable or dynamic way becomes a pattern there. The HPRN platform was built also by NSF support here in the San Diego County. And it was back when the only internet connectivity in the back county of San Diego and wireless connectivity. And it enabled many different areas through sensing, and cameras were installed, for instance, in mountaintop weather stations were installed, and other forms of sensors over time. And it became one of the platforms actually over time that's being used also for situational awareness in societal events like fires. And one of the applications that we tried in that sense and we built as a demonstration that I'm going to discuss today is being able to do some smoke detection or other things related to the fire that's going on or environmental sensing like the weather, and sending that information from the edge to a cloud-based platform for that modeling to be done, or in this case, Expanse for that modeling to be done on the composable system. Sage is not the only edge exercise, so to say. Ongoing experiments are also happening in this ChaseCI Nautilus platform to bring different types of processors and accelerators to the edge of HPRN. So same network can be used, or coupling different networks like the PRP and HPRN could be used for really building this pool of resources in a composable way that we can use together through applications. So that's some background on the systems and how we are actually thinking of coupling these systems together. Right, let's look into some applications. And I'll talk about first the hazards applications. And I think being able to turn data into value, we talked about when it's hazards, it's actually doing that fast can save lives, right? But the important thing about these hazards applications is they're often very heterogeneous, and they need different capabilities all at once for the end result to happen. They process big data, and that big data can be monitored, of course, can be analyzed and visualized for generating insights that are more bite-sized, so to say, or reducing dimensionality of the data. But they could also be used in predictive modeling and simulation related to the incidents or the hazards. In COVID-19, what would this be? We got so much data, right, over the last year, and it requires a holistic way to bring this data together so we can collectively look for challenges. We have disease data, virus models, variables, public health surveys, you name it. And we had models for spread modeling, virus understanding, right, atomic interactions, drug design, vaccine development had some computational models related to it. These are, of course, sets of models that could be used. But being able to put all of these together and using them for decision support, policy making, the vaccine treatment cure, thinking of different solutions, using all of this is really the goal of these activities, right? Being able to couple them together in the end and being able to do it fast will be important. For instance, the application that I was most involved in over the last year was this ring study of the variables. If you don't know the Aura ring, it's just this ring with some sensors in it, the one that you see here. And we were a part of a study collaboration between UCSF Health, Aura, and at UCSD, led by Professor Benjamin Smar from Hollywood Data Science Institute. And the study was the donated ring data from 70,000 plus and counting individuals to date to create a database of individuals to look at their individual disease symptoms. And this was coupled with public health surveys. So we know when these individuals got COVID or other health issues. And at the first time ever, in essence, at the individual scale, we can see the onset of COVID or another disease, compare them, offset of it during the disease, what happened, how was the fever. For instance, what we call asymptomatic, this was noticed some of the study participants have just a slight increase that wouldn't be detected on fever, but they took the test and it was positive. So at the individual level, being able to do this can give us clues about what can happen at the societal scale. So this is what we call multi-scale, from individual to the societal scale. But this, being able to do that requires ongoing integration and processing of this Internet of Things ring data, right? It's a big data, and AI, and maybe grab some insights from that collectively so we can use it in downstream disease models. At the societal scale, at the individual scale, but there are so many things that can be done to solve problems with that. But when you look at the system that's required to do that part of the ring infrastructure and couple that together, and maybe there are some closed loops between them, right? When we look at back and forth, it goes through a whole big data and AI loop in an auto-scalable way. And this was built in the Nautilus, on top of Nautilus. But once you build models with that, those models can be used for inference in an auto-scalable way. And interactivity maybe can be done, and we are doing it through Jupyter Hub. But there's the training component that requires the capacity, and being able to couple that training to this inference infrastructure or secure data infrastructure becomes part of that, train, infer, and on a daily basis, being able to do that, and maybe also parameterize simulations through it, it opens possibilities that that cannot be done at the moment without significant programming. So that's another huge motivator. So this shows, for instance, how that auto-scaling can be done using a big data system on Nautilus in the TempRedict project. Wildfires. We have a societal problem. Wildfires are a big part of that. And over the years in the wildfire project, we worked on workflows that integrates wildfire technology and integrates data from multiple sources that give us data on weather forecasts, real-time weather, fire perimeters through remote sensing and official data sets, landscape and fuel, vegetation that burns during the fires. And we built what we call the dynamic data-driven fire modeling capabilities to bridge collection of data, curation of data to fire modeling. So there's a lot of big data in the loop simulations that this type of thinking enables and makes possible. During a fire, this is really about that dynamic behavior is about where's the fire? Can we sense that and understand that? And can we integrate everything we know about that moment, about that fire? And then we can turn that into the information on its direction and rate of spread and where it will be in the next couple of hours. This again is continuous iteration, and doing that every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, every time we get new data. Right? Continuous iteration, integration, learning, and assimilation of that data into the simulation is the activity, and it has some specific characteristics. Right? So we'll get real-time weather data, landscape data, bioperimeter, again, just to summarize, combine it with simulations and turn that into mapping and monitoring platforms. When you look at different parts of this, imagery collected about the fire or the data collected about the ongoing fire can be turned into, through some analytical capabilities at the edge on a cloud with some perimeter, into a perimeter information that can then be used to compare to the simulations, and that learning about what the fire is doing becomes one of the significant difference makers in this type of modeling. And similarly, doing that for better observed, predicted weather, the maybe patchy fuels that requires integration and creating different forms of data that the fire modeling ensembles can use is important. So what is the infrastructure? And when you look at that, you could definitely put also AI in we are actually working on how we can do AI for ensemble generation from everything we learn. There are different compute capabilities that are needed, and that needs to be there. But the simplest one that I'm going to talk about, which was demonstrated using composable systems, is being able to create an operational fire model and understand how it differs from what was measured, and being able to then assimilate that and rerun the model based on what was learned. Again, this requires collecting imagery during the fire and using that to parameterize a modeling ensemble, and the integrated modeling product to be compared to that perimeter that was collected on a regular basis. And what we talked about, HPRN, PRP, SAGE, Expanse, is all at play here. Sorry, it said comment accidentally, but so what was it again? We are using the composable systems to compose federated clusters out of Nautilus and Expanse. When it comes to the application level, this becomes being able to do smoke detection and in this case, camera imagery is processed on Chase CI in this scenario. So the camera comes, actually the imagery comes, the smoke detection happens, and that triggers through the same workflow a fire modeling ensemble on Expanse and also on by fire. So the next step of this is actually that smoke detection to be happening at the edge, and for that to trigger fire modeling ensembles and also some of the collected information to create a training pipeline on Expanse, so we can save these models and use them to infer information across these platforms. But some of these models are very simple, the ones that we are talking about. The next step, I think, is even more going to be requiring this composability. Because until now, what I showed you is getting 2D weather, 2D imagery, and 2D fuel information, and sending them to a model so that could give us fire perimeter at 30-meter resolution in 2D. The next step of this that we are working on is to generate actually 3D fuels at 1-meter resolution, 3D weather information, and there's a lot of AI in massaging those, so to say, to fit the simulation tools. And simulating fire in a way we can actually understand the patterns it's burning, internally what the fire is doing, what kind of things it's emitting, or how that emission gets transported. So these are big scientific challenges that requires this type of integration. And the faster we are able to couple these systems and couple these codes together, the faster that information will be useful in things like not just fire suppression or fire management, but also things like prescribed burns and fuel treatments, which is what we need. And there's some major AI capability integration here, right? There's some sensor integration to create, again, that data that can fit these models, and understanding inside the fire models those complex processes, so the models can be fine-tuned when they're executing, and also being able to then get this information and use it in an optimized platform so it could be useful for, let's say, creating scenarios for prescribed burns or permitting them. Another application is in the neuroscience imaging space. Here, the idea is to actually create a training and inference pipeline in a way that through a gateway, a community can use this federated Expanse and Nautilus combination. So these are really heavily loaded slides, but the idea is for the training and simulation to be happening in Expanse and in a closed loop fashion while that's happening, to be able to do some auto-scalable inference for detection of and annotation of imagery. And there's a simulation pipeline, right? Data processing, large-scale simulation and analysis of that. There's a modeling pipeline that goes from human-in-the-loop labeling to training to inference and full labeling of the imagery and analysis of that. And when you then couple these together through a composable systems, it becomes this data processing to large-scale simulation and being able to do this loop as fast as possible. And when you actually turn that into a service diagram where these services are executing, we would see that some of it gets executed on Expanse on the training part, and some of it will be on Nautilus, and that's actually actively demonstrated at the moment. And PRP is now the national research platform. It's the national context to it instead of Pacific research platform in this diagram. And there's a secret sauce here. Although these computing systems can be coupled as a Kubernetes cluster together, and Kubernetes is managing them, there is a storage backend, a Ceph cluster that these two systems actually share, and they're able to exchange data through it. So there is a middle component. They'll look for any application like this that we are using composable systems for. How do we couple these, and how do we actually federate the storage behind, so it's not just a compute level, but data can also be composed as at systems level and shared. So this actually, even this early application led to some significant results to produce faster than ever some mapping of the regions in the mouse brain. And I think we could see the acceleration through community involvement through this NeuroCube platform that has this systems capability behind it. Again, that's a user-facing platform that enables access to data, training, inference at scale, and being able to really close the loop in a seamless fashion. So these were some applications, and as you could see, they're all at the starting level, demonstration level, but they're still pretty impressive in terms of what they contributed to these systems. And you also can appreciate, I think, after some of these diagrams, it's not a turnkey functionality. We need to really collaborate to develop these composable applications, and over time, hopefully generalize these patterns and make it more turnkey than they are right now. But we are looking for those heterogeneous applications and those workflows across multiple systems, and they have to be right now in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So if there's this resource, it needs to be available as a Kubernetes cluster, a part of it at least. And storage and computing requirements, there are some unique requirements there. End-to-end pipelines for a solution need to be defined for each application. And if you're interested in this functionality and you think you have applications, please reach out, contact Expanse user support through the help desk at Exceed, and request for a consulting session. And with a summary of what you think is the composable systems application is and why. And we will collectively, collaboratively with you, evaluate the feasibility and set up follow-up meetings. And at that point, we'll look into, also an extended engagement. So we'll actually, we hope to work together to develop new unique applications together. Thank you. I can also take some questions. We have a few minutes left. So I'm going to actually do this so I can see the chat a lot more effectively now. Expanse name was definitely inspired by this expansion concept, although there's no one-to-one correlation there, but that was definitely representative of what we are trying to achieve here. And we are using the Bright cluster manager and the capabilities offered by that. And they have actually a unique feature for being able to use both Slurm and Kubernetes together under the same cluster. And the CM scale offered by Bright is also one of the secret sauce in terms of being able to do that in a scalable fashion, right? In a elastic fashion, so to say, when there's request. So was most of or all of the training learning unsupervised? It depends on the application. For the there's some deep learning training in some of these applications. So, and but there were some labeling involved as well. So it depends also what kind of training we are doing. It allows for both. So could you talk about the challenges you have faced with using Ceph for data federation? I can't personally, I think I'm the beneficiary of Ceph being there in this case. But there is a, and I think it's actually pretty useful, and I don't know if there are a lot of challenges, honestly, but there is a, and it's cloud compatible thanks to that, right? There is a really difficulty in doing storage federation. And, Kubernetes ecosystem wasn't built for federating multiple namespaces at the namespace level. And so right now, there are some...
I can take that one.
Oh, hi, Dima. I didn't know that. That's great. Dima is much better in articulating that.
Yeah, in Ceph, we currently, so Ceph provides 3 types of storage: RBD, which is block storage, CephFS, which is shared file system storage, and S3. And first 2 are only accessible from inside Kubernetes. And so it's really tricky to federate that. We are still working on it, and it starts from network federation, meaning that Kubernetes clusters can see each other's internal network. And we have a good progress with that. And once we're done, we will be able to also see CephFS and RBD. And for now, we're just going the easy way. We're using S3 storage, which is accessible from outside of Kubernetes cluster because it's just an HTTP service. And so there are no challenges in using that. All jobs are basically using the globally accessible URLs and from either cluster.
Dima, did you want to talk about storage federation as well?
Yeah, I just did. So once we have network federation, we'll be able to federate storage fully and utilize the internal provisioned volumes in Kubernetes clusters from federated clusters. But it's not there yet. So for now, we can only access the resources which are treat them as being accessed from outside of the Kubernetes cluster.
Thank you. And Mary reminded us using the composable systems on Expanse will require an allocation. So that's a part of that collaborative process. It's going to follow still the exceed allocation guidelines. And we are going to work with you to ensure some of that allocation can be converted and how to apply for it. Now that I'm more carefully looking at who is there, I'm going to have some shout outs to, we also have John Graham in the audience who together with Dima built the platform for Nautilus and wrote some of this functionality, and a lot of the composable systems functionality was inspired by this early work and being able to expand that, so to say, to other platforms. And it's inspiring, I think, a number of the new AI platforms that are up and coming to be Kubernetes compatible. And we are hoping we'll be able to start bringing in a more standardized fashion these new resources to have that ability to compose with Expanse nodes. So do you have a date about the response time of the system for a given application was asked? Right now, we are looking into working with up to probably 2-3 applications in the first year, and we'll evaluate those upon request. Please reach out and we'll definitely get back to you as soon as possible. So, good question. What commercial cloud bursting will be a part of this composable system for using FPGAs provided by Azure for training? Again, that question requires, I think, some evaluation, because for some type of applications, for high throughput computing, doing the cloud bursting through Slurm might be the right choice. And Expanse already has that functionality as well. So depending on what the application workflow is, we'll evaluate, and either cloud bursting or the composable systems could be useful in those contexts. And as John said, there are some FPGAs already available also in Nautilus. So by using Nautilus and Expanse together, that could be possible at the moment as well. Right now, the way it's implemented, cloud bursting functionality is through Slurm in Expanse, just to make my comment clear there. I think we have 2 more minutes. We might get another question in the meantime, but I would like to thank everyone for being with us today. And we are looking forward to working on these exciting applications together. And again, thanks Jeff, Mary, Dima, John, and others who also are a big part of the Expanse team on the composable systems part.
Right, thanks to you too, Ilkay, and good job to John and Dima and everyone. It was very impressive. I loved the 3D wildfire simulation. That was pretty awesome. Kind of an overwhelming presentation, to be honest, but I appreciate it. And as we mentioned earlier, the slides and the recording will be made available as soon as Zoom gets the transcription done.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really amazing to see all the things you guys have plugged in there. And I asked that question about, response time, thinking about disaster responses, hurricanes flooding an area, down in the south, and biological contamination, and just how long, how a system like this could save lives. It's so interesting and important. And I can see the potential for that with this system. It's just great.
Thank you, Mary. I didn't notice it was you asking, so I misinterpreted the question. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
With the wildfire application, actually, we are doing, runs in the order of minutes. Right? There's a whole fusion center that gets involved, and when there's a fire, it's operational, and it responds in within the next 5 minutes of ignition.
Oh, that's impressive to have all those systems firing up, communicating, sharing data, and all on the edge. That's pretty impressive and
Thank you.
Encouraging. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for again listening and being with us till the end. Slides and the recording will be shared and announced.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Ilkay.
And thanks everybody for attending. Have a great weekend.
Bye, everyone.